Thank you everybody for joining today's session on determining your ideal career path. We will go ahead and get started momentarily, but before diving into the content, I just wanted to say a quick thank you to Franklin for moderating this conversation. I am glad that you reached out on LinkedIn, and it has been great to collaborate with you to set this event up. To provide a quick overview of my background for those who I have not met, my name is Tristan Francis and I attended Wharton where I majored in finance, legal studies, and business ethics. While in college, I spent summer internships within sales at Google, then private wealth management at Goldman Sachs, then investment banking at Morgan Stanley, where I joined full time after graduation. While at Morgan Stanley, I worked across a variety of divisions. I started by covering consumer retail companies within investment banking. Then I transitioned to sales and trading, where I covered our largest asset management accounts. After doing this for a few years, I joined an internal strategy role to help launch a team focused on increasing business with Asian, Black, and Hispanic clients. And after all of these experiences, I then moved into talent management and focused on internal mobility and specifically how to move our top performing analysts from one division to another. After Morgan Stanley, I went to Harvard Business School for my MBA. I had three primary goals during business school. First, I wanted to develop leadership skills. Second, I wanted to study organizational behavior. And third, I wanted to gain personal clarity on the type of work that I wanted to pursue with my life. There were two main experiences at Harvard that enabled me to develop as a leader. First, I served as the student body co-president of my class. In this role, my objective was to foster a cohesive, collaborative community on campus. I had the opportunity to lead an exceptional, diverse team of more than 70 classmates and manage a budget of more than 1.3 million. The second experience was serving as the education representative for my section. As context, each MBA class at Harvard is approximately 930 students, which is broken down into 10 groups of 93, which we refer to as a section. Every section elects one representative who serves as the liaison to their professors. These two roles allowed me to give back to my community while fueling my growth as a leader. In terms of classes, I focused largely on organizational behavior. My highlight was spending 1.5 years working with Professor Leslie Perlow, who serves as the head of research at Harvard Business School. Alongside a small group of MBA students, we co-designed a course called Crafting Your Life, which launched in the fall of 2019 and has been taught to roughly 100 MBA students at Harvard thus far. This course aims to help students clarify their purpose and live with greater intentionality. While serving as a research associate, I completed approximately 120 alumni interviews. Each interview began with the same question: tell me about how your life unfolded after HBS, highlighting the major personal and professional transitions which you went through. What were the trade offs that you had to make, and how did you come to those decisions? In addition to informing the modules that would be taught during the Crafting Your Life course, these conversations provided me with tremendous personal and professional clarity around the impact that I aspire to have. The impact I want to have with my life can best be summarized through two core questions that I hope to spend as much time as possible thinking through during my career. The first core question is, how can companies create a culture where their employees are engaged and excited about their work on a daily basis? The second core question is, how can one best help another person reach their full potential? To address my core questions at an organizational level, the relevant topics where deep expertise will best enable me to have an impact are organizational design, human capital management, as well as diversity, equity, and inclusion. I joined consulting as a way to continue developing my expertise in these areas, and I felt that the Boston Consulting Group, and particularly our people and organization practice area, would be an ideal way for me to further explore and build experience within these topics. At an individual level, the relevant skills that will best enable me to help people reach their full potential include coaching, public speaking, and writing. Every few weeks, I host an open invite professional development event on Zoom. In addition to giving back and helping professionals navigate their career, I also cherish these sessions as a way of honing my coaching, public speaking, and writing skills. This ultimately equips me to most effectively help others reach their full potential and prepares me to accomplish this mission at scale. If interested in learning more about the Open Invite professional development events and to see a list of the upcoming sessions, please visit my personal website or scan the QR code on the left. If the upcoming event topics do not include your greatest areas of interest, please let me know what topics you would like to see covered, as I welcome suggestions. Feel free to reach me via a message on LinkedIn or by scanning the QR code on the right. Thank you again for tuning in for this discussion. And without further ado, I am excited to dive into today's conversation with Franklin on determining your ideal career path.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Franklin Chamisi. I'm a second-year analyst at Bank of America Securities, or B of A, in equity research. I cover kind of a niche space between consumer and industrial staples, consumer staples and industrial, called home builders and building products. Yeah, that's essentially, what I do. We're here, to basically discuss, determining the right path for your career, something that I, think a lot about, and was something that I was, interested in discussing with Tristan, and he had the idea to make this a broader kind of Zoom conversation with anybody else who may be interested. So thank you all for joining, and that's essentially it about me.
A little bit about myself, originally from New York, first generation college student. And I share that because when I arrived in college, I had no idea what I wanted to do. So, on the topic of determining the right career path for me, a lot of it was experimentation, trying a bunch of different roles, reaching out to mentors, observing the way that they navigated their career path. So, I'm happy to kind of speak about that outreach in detail, how I identified the right people, the types of questions that I asked. Definitely want to make the conversation as detailed and helpful as possible in that regard. Did a variety of different internships while I was in college. So first working at Google within sales, and then after that pivoted over to private wealth management at Goldman, then investment banking at Morgan Stanley, which is what I ultimately did immediately after graduating from college. And then after doing that for about 5 or 6 years, and I did a variety of roles while I was there. So investment banking, then sales and trading, then a strategy role focused on increasing business with Asian, Black, and Hispanic clients. And then a talent management role. I moved around this much because throughout the whole period, I knew that I eventually wanted to go back to business school. And given I knew that I was planning on going back to business school, for me, I figured the more different things that I see within financial services, the more holistic view of the industry I'll have. And I also felt like it would help differentiate me in terms of the actual business school application process. So when I was applying to business school was very targeted my search. So HBS was the only program that I applied to. Happy to kind of go into details in terms of what it was about that program, but I had researched a lot of programs. And my thought process was I knew that I wanted to go to HBS specifically as opposed to just wanting to go to business school. And it was partly wanting the very international program, and specifically an international in terms of like opportunities that would be available to me. Um, and then also feeling like wanted to be able to help serve some communities that I felt Harvard was unique in that every community throughout the world is kind of is familiar with it. So even if I'm looking to support people in a rural part of China, throughout certain areas in or in the U.S. underserved communities, like all of them, Harvard was still a household name, and I felt like that would help me get my foot in the door for regardless of the opportunities that I wanted to do. So went back, did my MBA, was very involved while I was on campus, served as the student body co-president, and spent most of my academic time focused on the organizational behavior space, which is what I'm interested in long term. So basically, two central questions: one, how can I help people reach their full potential? And two, how can I help organizations create an inclusive culture? So these are like the two things that I'm core focused on. And for me, as I think through roles that I'm interested in, this is how I assess the opportunities that I'm interested in based on how much exposure they give me to be able to address those two things. So with that, I'll pause there. And Franklin, I'll turn it over to you. But maybe before we do that, it'd be great to just hear a little bit in terms of what's on everybody's minds and topics that they're interested in discussing. So maybe if we can do a round robin, that would be ideal. So maybe Shuying, I'll start with you, and then I'll go over to Lauren.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Tristan. Can you guys hear me well?
Yep, can hear you great.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I'm really interested in the topic today, determined by career path. And so I currently intern at a startup that's in the financial services industry. But because of it's a startup, I get the opportunity to explore a lot around with my roles. Basically, I have the kind of like the freedom to determine what I want to do going forward. So I think the topic I would be interested in is if I already kind of like narrowed it down to maybe finance and investment, but how to determine, there are plenty of roles within a specific topic. Like, how do you know which one fits you and kind of like plays with your strengths and weaknesses?
Okay, got it. That's helpful, and we'll address all of these things that we're bringing up, but maybe we'll just go through and hear from everybody, just so that I can kind of weave them all together. Lauren?
Hey, Tristan. Yeah, so I would be considered an experienced professional. Currently working in a private wealth management space. I too work for Bank of America in their private bank division, but I have core interest in transitioning to the asset management space. So I would just kind of want your thoughts and ideas on what that transition could look like, because one of the things I am considering is going back to business school. So I'm just trying to get some thoughts on do I need to hit that reset button, or if I can do it internally or in a strategic way where that may not be necessary?
Awesome.
Thanks.
Yep. And hey, Carla, how about you?
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, I can hear you great.
Yeah, so I basically was just curious on, I guess, what is like a best way to get into like some of the entry level positions when you maybe don't have like a business degree or something, or if you don't have like specific skills or background, like what you would recommend when you're maybe switching complete fields and kind of trying something completely new to get your feet wet and like try it out in the beginning.
Okay. Thank you. And hey, TY, I see that you just joined a moment ago. We're basically going around and just sharing what element of determining the right career fit you're most interested in. So wonder if you have anything to add.
Oh, hello. Good morning, good evening. Yeah. I think for me is actually I have been into my professional journey for a couple of years. My interest will be how could we switch to different roles, and also find my best fit in the firm or explore different opportunities in the market that might be my interest. Yeah.
And one very last person, you're logged in as iPad, so I'm not sure who the attendee is, but if you have anything you'd like to add as well, I just want to give you the space to share what topics you're most interested in. Okay, maybe we'll might be noise in the background. So Franklin, would you rather us maybe dive directly into some of these topics, or did you want to start with some of the topics you had pre-prepared? Either way is okay with me.
No, absolutely. I think given a little bit more color about the specific roles that you may have been in may help frame how they're thinking about this, or maybe give them a little bit of color, or maybe even potentially answer some questions early for them. So I'm just going to touch on maybe investment banking and sales and trading, and then maybe we can start.
That sounds perfect.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, so starting in the beginning of your career, I know that investment banking is quite a popular route for many analysts, for many students coming out of undergrad. Can you explain your initial thought process behind pursuing investment banking? Did you enter the role with the view that it was a great stepping stone, or did you see yourself sort of more in the long-term view as a career investment banker?
Yeah. So certainly more so the first than I never at any point viewed myself as staying in investment banking long term. In fact, even when I entered it, I was relatively sure that I didn't want to stay in investment banking long term. That being said, I was fresh out of college, so I for sure entered it with an open mind, meaning if I had loved it, I would have stayed within it. Um, but so in terms of kind of how I thought about how I actually thought about it, for me, I was actually in my senior year, I was on the fence between going to Morgan Stanley and going and working for Teach for America. I've always been very passionate about education, and I know that those two things sound like very different paths, and they are. For me, a big deciding factor between Morgan Stanley was actually I knew that. So my oldest brother didn't go to college. He's lived most of his adult life below the poverty line in New York. And I knew that I would be supporting him and potentially other people in my family, or I should say, I wanted to be able to. And that wasn't something that I was going to be able to do on a teacher's salary. So investment banking, quite frankly, was the job that was going to pay me the most money out of college. And that was something that I valued, not because I had expensive tastes, but because I, wanted to be able to lay that foundation for myself. So I went into investment banking. It was lucrative as I anticipated. So I was able to kind of save up money, buy a place for myself when I was 25. I bought a place for my older brother when he was 26. After I bought that place for him, I kind of realized that I felt like I had enough of a financial foundation in place that I didn't need to make my decisions purely on the basis of money at that point. Um, and once I had done that, I felt like, okay, if I strip money out of the job, would I still stay in investment banking and financial services, broadly speaking? And the answer was definitely no. In my case, I think that when I've always been somebody that um, I feel really excited and fulfilled when I'm doing something connected to, what I find meaning in. And one of the guiding questions that I ask myself is imagine that you become the expert in whatever the thing is that you're doing 20 years from now when you're retired and you don't actually, or 30 years from now when you're retired. um, are you going to want college students reaching out to you asking you for your guidance on that topic? And it's a great metric in my mind, right? Because if I thought about investment banking, would I want college students reaching out to me and asking me about deals and mergers and acquisitions and stuff like that? Absolutely not. Same for like sales and trading. Would I want people asking me about advice in the markets and things like that? Absolutely not. So I kind of knew that in terms of financial services, that wasn't going to be the path for me. And so in that case, once I started to realize that very quickly, it became okay, let me make the most out of this experience at Morgan Stanley. Because I did think it was a great company, great resources, great people, great platform. And so I was like, okay, I'm not really interested in financial services long term, but there's a ton for me to learn here at Morgan Stanley, and it will be a good stepping stone. So that's kind of how I viewed it. I guess so to summarize, it was laying the foundation of my career. And it was also yeah, it was really laying the foundation of my career and setting myself up for business school and giving myself a good financial foundation.
No, that's a great reason, great color and level of detail that you gave there. So from that role, you transitioned into working in the sales and trading role, where I believe you were working directly on the trading floor, correct?
Working on the trading floor, but it was more of a sales role, and it was different from most jobs on the sales and trading floor in that we weren't covering a specific product. We were covering it was senior relationship management, so we were covering Morgan Stanley's largest accounts.
Got it. So in that role, you're talking about Morgan Stanley, which is a really large financial organization. What specifically led you to sales and trading? And what can you touch on some of the key qualities needed to be successful in investment banking versus more of a markets facing sales and trading role?
Yeah. So in terms of what led me to sales and trading within investment banking, I was working probably 110 or so hours a week, depending on the week, maybe 100 to 110. And I didn't really feel like that left enough time for me to actually think about what do I want to do with my life. Didn't leave me enough time to think about how am I going to prepare for a strong MBA application. And so for me, moving into sales and trading was, it didn't pay as much as investment banking, but very, very, very close. And on an hourly basis, much better. And so in my mind, it was a conscious decision to go from working 100 hours a week to working about 50 to 60 hours a week that would buy myself time to ultimately invest in thinking about what it is that I want to do with my life, which was very important to me. And so that was a big piece of it, and also just gave me the breathing room I needed to prepare for the business school application process. So that was a big part of it. The other thing that I liked about it is it provided me a lot of senior level exposure. So it was going to allow me to develop a very different skill set. So the structure of the team was basically, we would have these account captains who had typically been in sales and trading for 20, 25 years. They were very seasoned. They typically focused on one product throughout their career, but at this stage in their career, they'd had such strong relationships that they just covered the accounts and they didn't really sell particular products. And then every single one of those individuals had somebody reporting into them that was basically like his or her apprentice. And in my mind, I place a lot of value if you can find yourself in close proximity early in your career, really any point, but especially early in your career. If you can find yourself in close proximity with somebody who has been very successful at what they do in their career, and is exceptional at something, and you have the ability to actually learn from that person in terms of what makes them exceptional, I think that that's a great way to accelerate growth. And that's what I saw in this role when I moved into sales. Because when I was on the investment banking side, as an analyst, you get direct exposure to, maybe associates or VPs, people who are, 5 to 8 years into their career. It's not the same as getting direct exposure to somebody who's like 30 years into their career and just absolutely exceptional at what they do, which is what I got as soon as I switched over into the sales and trading side, because the people that we were reporting into on this particular team, they were the best salespeople that Morgan Stanley had, which is why they were moved into this role to cover the biggest accounts that Morgan Stanley had. And so it was a bit of asking myself, when I'm assessing opportunities, I'm always asking myself, who is it that I'm going to be learning from in this role? And so I think that is a big piece of why I made those pivots that I made. To the question in terms of what makes somebody exceptional in banking versus what makes somebody exceptional in sales and trading. On the investment banking side, I think attention to detail, ability to follow instructions, work ethic, willingness to maintain a high morale even on low amounts of sleep, I felt like were the attributes that made somebody successful in banking. In sales and trading, it was more so your ability to have a conversation with anybody about anything. Your interest in the markets definitely helped, or ability to convey an interest in the markets. And I would say responsiveness, so ability to kind of give an answer immediately, as opposed to, I remember the funny thing when I switched from banking to sales and trading is I remember, my manager in sales and trading, when I first moved over to the team, they would ask for something. It'd be like, oh, okay, we got to check with the fixed income desk to see whether or not they've recently contacted this client. And, I'd be like, okay, cool. And I'd like open up my email getting ready to send a message, and he'd be like, what are you doing? The fixed income desk is over there. Go over there and talk to them. Versus in banking, you don't do that. It's like, okay, we have to put together this, presentation. Let's check with the mergers and acquisitions team in terms of whether or not they, have any materials on this. It'd be okay, let me set up an email to set up a time to have a conversation with somebody on this team. And it's very structured. Versus in sales and trading, if the person's on the same floor as you you pick up the phone and you call, you walk over to their desk. If they're on a different floor from you, you give them a phone call immediately. If you give them a phone call and they don't pick up, you find out, like, are they in a meeting? If they're not in a meeting, you go to the floor that they're on and you go over to their desk and you talk to them. You get your answers immediately, and it's just a different way of thinking about it. And I found it helpful, in certain situations, both approaches can work. And so having a window into the two different, very different ways that they operated was helpful.
Right. Yeah. So more kind of structured environment versus one with somewhat of a flatter hierarchy and more emphasis on relationship management and getting information in a more timely manner. Yeah, that's great information. I'm gonna pause right here. I think we had some people who did have questions that they wanted answered. So, Tristan, feel free to kind of attack one that you feel.
Yeah, awesome. So Sheehan, you had mentioned in terms of, okay, that you're interested in a broad space, but even within the space of finance and investing, there's so many different roles. So how can you actually figure out which role you're interested in focusing on? One of the exercises that I think could be helpful in this regard was, say you're interested in two different areas. So as an example, what are two different roles that you're contemplating within the space?
I think one of them would be more on the quantitative side. So for instance, like a financial analyst. And on the other hand, I've been doing some, investor meetings, and I think investor relations is another role that I'm interested in.
Okay. Awesome. And yeah, that's helpful because these are like two different roles in terms of what the day-to-day really looks like. So if I was interested in figuring out, okay, am I interested in the quant side or am I interested in investor relations? What I would do would be try to find 5 people that are on the quant side, try to find 5 people that are on the investor relations side, have conversations with those 5 people, and really try and understand what has their career and life looked like. What has been the best parts of their career and the time that they have spent? What have been some of the frustrations? What are some of the trends that they see these businesses change over time? Do they see their business as something that's becoming increasingly important or decreasingly important? I would really try and map out, okay, here's this. And then I would ask myself, okay, I've now talked to 10 people. If I could just assume that my life ends up looking a lot like one of these people, which one of these am I happiest about? And if it's naturally, if you have 10 conversations and 4 out of the 6 of them fall into, 4 out of the top 5 are people who chose that investor relations path, or 4 out of the top 5 are people who chose the quant path, you can start to, in my mind, you can start to differentiate between which way your gut is actually leaning. And I think that this is not a process that is kind of one and done, but rather it's a process that you might do this in May, and then after having these conversations, a few months down the line in July, you may be like, okay, it's time to now assess this again, maybe with the same 2 or with a different 2. So I would revisit it, but that's usually how I've thought about differentiating between potential paths.
Yeah, that's very helpful. I think that sounds like a great method to get to know the details and insights. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And Lauren, you had mentioned considering, contemplating going back to business school, and whether or not it is necessary. I guess my rationale in thinking through the going back to business school, not going back to business school, I kind of thought about it as, after I graduated from college, I knew that I was going to have be working for, call it 30 years. And I asked myself, would I rather work for 30 consecutive years, or would I rather, 28 years of work and 2 years of business school? And there was really no life that I could have imagined it for myself where 30 and 0 felt like a better combination than 28 and 2. So I knew I wanted to go back to business school. For me, it was just a question of when. Is it absolutely necessary? No, it's not necessary. There are people who have successful careers in all sorts of industries. I mean, the head of BCG's office in Singapore right now has nothing besides an undergraduate degree. And you know, there's plenty of people that I come across in consulting that are successful in partners and they have nothing besides a college degree, and not just in a consulting context, but in many contexts, in fact. And so I don't think that it's necessary. But for me, you know, my goal with each year is to maximize productivity and happiness. And for sure, business school maximized happiness. I just like that environment. Now, that's not true for everybody. Some people don't like the school environment, don't like the academic environment. So for you, it might be a different, or for people, it might be a different equation. But for me, I knew it was going to really be good in terms of, you know, it's a happy period because you're meeting people, you're having interesting conversations, you're speaking with thought-provoking professors that are the most brilliant people in their fields. You're travel, you know, when I, you know, during the era where travel was a thing, you're traveling, you're getting to meet people from different cultures and different parts of the world. These were all things that I loved. And, you know, then on top of that is the question of like, will it be productive? Now, in my mind, and this is a big part of the reason why when I was going through my business school search process, I was very focused on HBS specifically because of the HBS alumni network, and the things that this body of people went on to do. And in my mind, I was like, okay, there's no way in my mind that an HBS degree will not be productive. And I was like, okay, therefore, I, you know, purely just from the network and the access to the people and the ability to kind of connect. So education aside, I was like, there's no way having this thing is not going to help me accomplish what my goals are in life. So that became like that became a no-brainer for me. Yeah, so I'll pause there and see if there's a particular piece of that that is helpful for me to unpack. But that's really how I thought about this decision when I was contemplating whether or not to go back to school.
Yes, that's helpful. What class of HBS are you?
2019.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, one of my good friends, 2018, is that Zachary Addy? I don't know if that name rings a bell, but
that name does. I'm trying to think what company did he work at?
He was at PNC prior to HBS.
Okay.
We share the same undergrad alma mater, Florida A&M University.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. No. Man. Because I'm guessing was he active with the African American Student Union?
I have no idea. I do
Okay.
apologize. I have no
Anyway,
idea.
yeah, that name sounds familiar, but I didn't know him. I didn't know him too well. Usually, you know everybody. Usually you know about 30 to 40% of people in your class,
Okay.
and then you know about 1 to 2%. No, you know about maybe 5% of people in the class above you. So yeah.
Yeah, that's helpful. I think part of the contemplating for me is, you know, as I mentioned, transitioning from private wealth management into asset management, and then also a long-term view of developing leadership skills, because leadership skills are transferable across various industries. So I'm trying to figure out the best combination of both, if you will, and trying to understand which path would potentially make more sense. So, but
Yeah.
thank you. What you provided was helpful.
Yeah, and on the leadership development, I do think that for me, HBS provides a lot of that opportunity. I mean, for me, the biggest leadership development opportunity by far that I've had in my life was actually co-leading student government, because it was a team of 70 people. It was a budget of 1.3 million and an objective of fostering a cohesive, collaborative community. And you have to work with people where you don't have the traditional levers that you have within the workplace, meaning I don't have compensation as something that I can use to motivate the people that are volunteering their time to do stuff for student government, in the same way that a manager in the workplace has the ability to provide a bonus, and the ability to really navigate the outcomes of the individual's role from a performance perspective. So without those levers, it really got me to think about, how do you connect with people on the level that you're really touching on what drives them as an individual, and how do you connect their own aspirations to the broader mission of an organization or a group of people. And so I learned a lot about leadership from that experience, and also from the classes that I took. And I took mainly like organizational behavior and leadership focus classes. And I have a summary that I put together that I'm happy to kind of share, basically like what the classes were, what my perspectives were on all of these classes and so forth. But I would say I did learn a lot about leadership in that context.
Yeah, I would definitely appreciate you sharing some of those summaries. We much
Yeah.
appreciate it. Thank
Yeah,
you.
just shoot me a message on LinkedIn with a reminder and with your email, and I can send that along.
Do
And
that now. Thank you.
to anybody who's interested in that.
Absolutely.
And so Carla, you had mentioned kind of looking at this conversation through the early lens, kind of with entry level positions when you don't have a business degree, and kind of what you're recommending in the initial stages in terms of getting your feet wet. For me, when I was in college and I was thinking about the early stages, the big piece that I was interested in was I wanted to see as many different things as possible. So even with the internships that I did, it was a matter of, okay, Google is very different from private wealth management, is very different from like, I really tested the water. I talked to people in, I want to think about every single imaginable industry that I could come across. When I met somebody and I was like, I'm remotely curious about what they do, but I'm not really sure what they do. I made it a point to actually set up time and have a conversation with them. I contemplated everything from going and doing PhD programs to HR, to obviously education, to banking, to consulting, all of these different things. And for each of these thought processes that I was maybe interested in, I found myself setting up time and having conversations with people. So I found that really helpful. In terms of not having a business for degree, I think for entry level positions, that's okay. And I wouldn't let that feel like and I know that this may be easier said than done, but I wouldn't let that feel like a barrier in terms of applying for opportunities. Meaning, if there's something that you come across and you're interested in it, I would really encourage you to actually go ahead and just apply for the opportunity. And what it is going to be, it's going to be about matching the experiences that you've had just in life to basically communicate why you'll be an effective fit or role for the particular role that you're applying for. And so, I've heard, one person that comes to mind was pizza. Basically, the only prior experience that he had was delivering pizzas. And he was able to explain why delivering pizzas at the University of Michigan it prepared him well to be a sales and trading analyst. And basically his point was very demanding, very demanding customers, sometimes not all that logical in what they're asking for, and need to kind of, be responsive. He came up with all of these reasons that, on the surface, it may seem like a ridiculous comparison, but when he was boiling it down, he was basically making the point like, look, I don't have actual experience in a market facing role, but like, I'm clearly interested in the space, and here are the things that I've done in my life that actually prepare me well for, picking up the phone and talking to salespeople and doing stuff that you would need me to do in this job. And, ended up getting the job. Another person that I went to college with, who was a good friend of mine, also, liberal arts background, didn't have any sort of business experience. He really wanted to work at Microsoft. And so at Penn, we were technically powered by Microsoft in terms of everybody had like an Outlook account, but everybody just auto forwarded their Outlook accounts to their Gmail. And so nobody was actually using their Outlook account. And to my friend, he was like, this is interesting. Like, why are people doing this. And basically, what he ended up doing was he interviewed like 100 or so students on campus and just talked to them about why they preferred Gmail over Outlook. And was able to gather it, put together some like presentation, and then just started reaching out to people at Microsoft that were connected to this in some way, saying, hey, I've surveyed 100 of my classmates. I've come up with some insights in terms of why we're using Gmail at the moment. Would you be interested in having a conversation about this? Now, if you think about it from the person on the Microsoft side, it's a no-brainer. Here's some student who's done a whole bunch of market research for you. And do you want to carve out the time just to listen to the person? So he was able to have a few of these conversations, build those initial entryways into the organization. After that, ended up mentioning that he was interested in a job. They flew him out for the interviews. He ended up getting the job. He worked there for a few years. So I share that story because it's a really creative way to demonstrate how you can actually get your foot in the door. I think if it's a well-designed kind of experiment that you're running, and you're able to reach enough of a volume. Now, my friend, 100 is probably more of a volume than you even need. But if you're able to get, 20, 30, 40 responses to a question that's going to be interesting to the company that you're interested at, you'll pretty much, I'm pretty positive you'll get an attentive audience at that company. Once you have an attentive audience at that company, if you're able to kind of impress them with the way that you communicate, the way that you share insights, the way that you answer questions and so forth, if you're able to impress them, pretty sure you'll get an interview. And if you get an interview, like everything, it's up to you to communicate why you're the best person for that job. And that's where I think that story of the pizza delivery person turned salesperson is a good example, because once you're in an interview, it's all about performance in my mind on that day. They wouldn't be interviewing you if they weren't open to you having a job at their company. So that would be how I've thought about it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, no
That's
problem.
very helpful.
Awesome.
That's fantastic insight, actually. The one about the market research in Microsoft, it's quite unique and I think very differentiated way to approach, a specific company and industry that you're interested in. Unless you have any other thing that you want to touch on with the participants in this call, I wanted to follow up with some more questions.
So the only last one I have is TY had kind of mentioned one question around switching roles. So I think one of the things that I wanted to share on this point of switching roles, one thing I hear from a lot of people who are in a role that they're not necessarily interested in, but they want to move into a different role, is they're not sure how to do that without stepping on the toes of people that they are that are in their current team or their current organization and so forth. And one of the things that I did early on in my career that was very helpful. So I'm part of an organization called Management Leadership for Tomorrow that helps underrepresented minorities navigate business. And in this organization, they match you up with a coach. And I basically, I gave myself, MLT gives you a lot of homework assignments. I decided on top of the homework assignments that MLT gave, I was going to give myself a homework assignment. And I told the person who was my coach that basically I'm going to speak to, I forget what the actual goal that I set was. I think it was like 3 people that are outside of my division, but in Morgan Stanley. I'm going to speak to them every single week as a way of just like getting a broader understanding of the organization and so forth. And then anytime I would talk to people, like I would actually share with my team. I'd be like, oh, I made this commitment to my coach that I was going to have 3 conversations a week. And it went from, they weren't like, why is Tristan, Tristan's must not be happy in banking because he's talking to people in other divisions, to, oh, okay, Tristan, is really involved in this extracurricular activity and he really cares about doing it. and he's honoring his word, and he said that he's going to have these conversations, and he's going out and he's doing it. Oh, I actually have a friend of mine who works in equity research. I can help Tristan reach his 3. I can put him in touch with this person. It changes the dynamic of the conversation. So if you're able to kind of give yourself some mechanism, explain to people, you don't have to do the outreach under the guise of, hey, I'm not happy in my current role, so I want to learn about your role. Do the research in the guise of, or if it's at the same company, the other thing that I did a lot is anytime I was on an email chain and there was one person who was on a team that I didn't know what they did, like strategic lead management. There's this whole team at Morgan Stanley, and I was like, what does strategic lead management do? And it's basically a hybrid between wealth management and banking, where, if there's a smaller company that needs banking type services, but it's too small for Morgan Stanley to look at, we basically match them up with a more boutique bank so that we can establish a relationship with the customer so that when they sell their business, they'll be a great wealth management client. So, they don't have the scale for it to make sense on the banking side, but we're keeping the business warm on the wealth management side in the future. I'm like, it's interesting that there's an entire team that's dedicated to doing this. So anytime I came across somebody who had a title and I wasn't sure what they did, I followed up with them and would have a conversation with them about that. So I'll pause there. And I just want to make sure that I answered everybody's question there. And then otherwise, we can kind of go ahead and dive back in, Franklin, to the questions you have.
No, you literally must have read my mind because you answered the question that the next question that I was going to ask basically how to successfully transition between 2 roles, how to make yourself cognizant of the position that you would want to go into, and then as well as just kind of potential situations to be cognizant of. So I guess maybe that last part is like, what are some major kind of either things that you've done or you've seen other people do when trying to transition within roles that you would probably advise to stay away from?
Awesome. So yeah, I guess I would say that maybe to summarize it, in terms of things that I would do, have as many conversations as possible, reach out under the guise of, I want to learn about what your role does, until it's very clear that there's an opportunity and that they're interested in you. Then make it known that you're interested in that opportunity. I would recommend starting to do this right away. So right when you start a role, you should already, in my mind, be thinking about what are the opportunities that you might do next and laying that foundation so that when it becomes apparent that the time has come for you to move into that next thing, you can basically flip a switch and you've already have those relationships warm and you can move quickly. So those are the things that I would do. The things that I would recommend avoiding would be never kind of talk negatively about the seat that you're in or the team that you're working with. I would avoid doing that largely because if you talk negatively about your current situation, your potential future situation might think, okay, well, 5 years down the line, you might be in this seat and talking negatively about this seat as you make your way to the next seat. So I would avoid doing that. Look to learn as much as possible in the seat that you are in. I would also recommend that, like, when you join, make an effort to get to know every single person on your own team. So you're kind of establishing yourself as just, in general, you're a sponge and you're trying to learn as much as possible from people. And that's a trait that people will appreciate, especially early on in the career. So when I joined my investment banking team, the first thing I did was try to, make an effort to get to know every person on my team. And that was super visible, right? Because people would see me having coffee chats with everybody on the team. And then it was just established, like, Tristan, is a sponge. He's just trying to learn from as much people as possible. So now it didn't feel weird when, after I talked to everybody on the consumer retail team, I was talking to everybody on the team that sat next to us. It didn't feel weird to people. They were like, okay, this is just the way Tristan is approaching his career. And yeah, and for most people, they respected that. They were like, okay, here's this kid who's like really hungry and just wants to learn. He's just trying to have conversations with people. So, now when I was off the desk 30 minutes here and there, it was kind of like, all right, Tristan's just out there talking to somebody again. But there were no negative connotations with that, so long as, I wasn't like, somebody wasn't waiting on me for a deliverable or something like that. When that wasn't the case, there was no negative connotations. If I was just like off the desk, it was kind of like, so I think that can be helpful to set that tone early on.
Wonderful. No, that's really great insight. Yeah, following that, you worked in a number of other roles at Morgan Stanley. I think you touched on those as well. And you also kind of touched on your rationale for entering into business school. So I'm going to skip the questions I had for that. One thing I did want to touch on though, when you came out of undergrad versus when you were coming out of business school, was there a certain kind of shift in your thinking of what roles you wanted to go into, what career you wanted to go into? I know like consulting is also another popular route coming out of both undergrad and business school. So was that something that you were heavily considering in both scenarios, or could you kind of give more color into how you were thinking about that?
Yeah, so I was thinking about it differently. I think when I was graduating from college, my mindset was more all experience is good experience. I want to try as many different things. I want to talk to as many different people. By the time I applied to business school, I knew what my core interests were. And I knew that like the two questions that interest me the most were at an individual level, how does one help people reach their full potential? And then the second question being at an organizational level, how do you design a culture that is inclusive so that people are engaged in their work and excited to show up every single day? So I knew that these were the two things that I was looking at addressing. For me, consulting was an opportunity to focus on the second, thinking about how you design organizational cultures and teams. And that's a big piece of why I joined BCG. And even as I was going through the business school recruiting process and looking at consulting firms and talking to BCG, my initial conversations with BCG, I was basically asking them, is there a way for me to specialize in this area right when I graduate? Because I knew it's what I wanted to do. And the response there was like, no, generally people come in as a generalist and they do a random walk and they see a whole bunch of different stuff. And there's value in seeing a whole bunch of different stuff. And if after seeing all of that stuff, you're still interested in doing this, then you can start to specialize. And that's kind of what I leaned towards and what I've done. And I've gone through the generalist experience. And now if I do stay at BCG, I will kind of specialize more in the topic that I'm interested in, and the topic hasn't changed. But there was value in seeing a whole bunch of random projects and having that generalist experience. So I guess I would say for me at this point, my approach to job search is very different from when I was in college. I no longer think any role is good for just for the sake of like, this is a different role, I get a new experience. There's something to be said for after a while, when you've seen enough, a great enough variety of roles, you start to have a sense of what you're interested in. And I think that once you start to develop that sense of what you're interested in, then I think it's a matter of actually chasing and pursuing that, so you can start to, going back to what is the legacy that I'm going to leave. I really want to develop an expertise in the topics that I'm going to be excited to talk about for a lifetime, even after I've, retired and so forth. I think that's why when I think about job fulfillment, the happiest and most fulfilled people that I've actually come across are professors. And I think that the reason that is the case is because professors are in a very unique role. And I'm thinking more tenured track business school professors when I say this. I'm less familiar with professors from other spaces. But tenured track professors, they tend to have started their career with a central question that they're interested in exploring. And then they research that central question. And then every part of their career for the rest of their career builds around their interest and what they were interested in doing. And as they get more and more seasoned, they get more and more ability to hone their life and work around the specific topic that they're interested in doing. So I feel like they have really high levels of satisfaction versus, I would say if I were to think about on average, how fulfilled do I think that the professors are making these numbers up? I would say maybe 60% of professors strike me as very fulfilled with the work that they do, 60, 70%. If you ask me that same question in a Morgan Stanley or a BCG context, you know, hovers around 5%. And so I don't find as many people that are just fundamentally fulfilled by the work that they're doing. In these realms. I think you find people that are happy with their life, especially in a BCG context. I think I find a lot of people that are happy with their life. It's very comfortable. They work with great people and so forth, but fundamentally fulfilled with the work that they're doing. That is a higher bar, and I don't come across as many people that do it. So academia, in my mind, being a professor is something that I've seen a higher than average success rate, at least in that regard.
That's a fantastic response. Yeah, no. Yeah, that answered a lot of questions, personal questions that I have about, how to think about roles as well, especially early on in my career. So that gives a lot of color. I'm going to pause again just to see if anybody has any like additional questions that they'd like to have Tristan answer.
Yeah. So you said if you had to guess a number for investment banking or consulting, you'd say like 5%. Would you, I guess, explain a little bit more like those 5% that you have noticed? Like what makes it different, or like what is their attitude, or what makes them like be like the 1% out of 100 that stands out?
So I would say, and actually, if I had to delineate a bit, I would say maybe 5% at Morgan Stanley, 10% at BCG. And of course, I'm making all of these numbers up. In a Morgan Stanley context, the people I saw who were really fulfilled just fundamentally loved what they were being paid to do, right? So if it was the salesperson, he or she fundamentally just loved the idea of picking up a phone and with an investment idea or a market-based idea, picking up the phone and just calling somebody and trying to convey and convince them of the, of what it was that they were, their idea. So they just enjoyed it. It almost felt like a game that was fun for them. And the hours of that game were the market hours. And when it started, they were excited to see how they would do that day. And when it ended, they were excited, and they felt fulfilled and they were eager to go back the next day. Like they really weren't viewing it as a job. It was more like, I just enjoy doing this. And the reason that I think that, banking has a higher percentage than has a lower percentage than a lot of other industries is because a lot of people, they're lured to banking and financial services because of the money and because it pays well. And then at some point, and I see this rationalizing process with my peers where they weren't fundamentally interested in this stuff, but they're trying to rationalize why they are fundamentally interested in something. And that's not going to work. Like, I don't think that people are capable of lying to themselves. And I think that in my mind, I feel like there is an ability to, like, if you think about your own life and you just think about people who feel full of life and full of energy and are really in their element, they look and feel different than when there's that person who maybe they're saying the same thing, maybe they're describing their job using the same adjectives and words. But I think we've all seen examples when that feels hollow versus when it feels, genuine and authentic. And I think that financial services, because it pays higher than other industries, you get a lot of people who move into this industry with non-authentic reasons and try to rationalize it, but really they just like the comfort of a larger paycheck. And within the roles that we're talking about, a paycheck isn't going to move the needle in terms of your life satisfaction, your happiness, what you have access to in the same way, in the threshold of the roles that we're talking to. I very much subscribe to, I mean, the research shows that at least in the US, I think the number is like 70,000 or 80,000 or something like that, meaning once you're making that amount of money, incremental money is not going to move the needle in terms of happiness or anything like that. And regardless of whether or not you agree with the 70 or 80,000, and I definitely think that number needs to be calibrated based on the city that you're in. So, if you're in New York or San Francisco, that number probably does need to be higher, or it does need to be higher than if you're in, Dallas or somewhere rural in the middle of the country where the costs are much lower. So, yeah, I think it really depends, but an authentic interest in the work that they're doing is, I think, what makes people fulfilled in a banking context. In a consulting context, I see a lot of people who find fulfillment because they're able to leverage the broader BCG platform towards a cause that they're interested in. So even in my case, if I were to stay at BCG for the long haul, I could see myself in theory falling into this category of being happy, not because I'm extremely passionate about the underlying work, but because in my mind, BCG gives me a platform to be able to have conversations like this, get in the door with like organizations, really give back, because there's just so many people that are interested in consulting and so many people that I can potentially help navigate their way to consulting. And the core thing, or one of the core things that I'm interested in doing, is helping people navigate their career choices, especially people who are earlier in their career. And consulting gives me just the best imaginable box to be able to do that from. So there are a lot of people that I see who can find fulfillment and happiness in a BCG context by leveraging the broader platform towards whatever cause that they are interested in.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you.
That is a fantastic wrap up. I think that's kind of one of the last things I was also wondering about too, as we're winding up to the top of the hour. Just essentially like wondering about like what you see part of the core tenets that drive somebody into a role. Because I'm starting to see the same things that you were talking about for some people who kind of move into financial services for the lure of money, for the lure of, getting their student loans paid off or whatever.
Mhm.
But then once that sort of threshold is passed, they don't have that same passion and drive. And I think you really did a fantastic job just kind of delineating like what the key differences are between each industries and between the firms as well. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. Thank you, Franklin, for organizing this. Everybody for dialing in. I don't have a hard stop on my end, but I do want to be mindful of people's time. So maybe I will. I guess in closing, I'll just say, if people have any other questions, please do feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. If there's a topic that you're interested in discussing, I'm happy to kind of set a call specifically to talk about that topic. And so I'll pause there so that if anybody needs to drop off the call, please feel free to drop off the call at this point. And thank you for tuning in. But I also don't have a hard stop on my end. So if there were incremental questions that people had, I don't want to, I want to make sure that I get those questions answered as well.
Absolutely. Well, I do have a hard stop as we're currently in the middle of earnings.
Yes.
And so it's a busy period for us. But
Yeah.
yeah, thank you so much for allowing me to host this conversation, and
Yeah.
it's been great. You all, the rest of you all, I hope we connect and keep the conversation going in the future. And yeah, see you guys.
Awesome. Thank you, Franklin.
Absolutely. Bye.
See ya.
Hi, Tristan. I do have a question, follow-up question.
Yep.
Actually, I just wondering because as I mentioned, I'm trying to figure out where the next step for my careers. The thing is, I think I tried some different paths and then also talk to different people and trying to get some interviews. But the thing is, turns out, like say, actually there are some gaps between my current role and what the next steps. And how did you to mitigate and then to close those gaps, especially actually I have been found in some of the very important interviews. It's kind of hurt a bit of self and then lose some confidence of seeing, so what is that the way I need to pursue. So sometimes I think it's a bit questioning about myself whether that's the correct direction. So that I would like to see your ideas.
Yeah. And maybe just one question, just so that I can get a little bit of context. When you say gap, like, can you give me an example of a gap that you're referring to?
Yeah, I think the thing is currently I have been a couple of working experience. When I tried different roles is the feedback is I get is to be honest, for very junior roles, I think it's very limited opportunities. But for a kind of a senior role, it seems like my current performance or capability is not so complex there to jump to a very higher level. So that's why when the recruiter or the HR feedback is saying actually they would like a more senior person, but it seems I'm not reached the bar. So that's a thing I think I also need to figure out. Yeah.
Okay. So why is it that you think they're looking for a more senior person in the role? Like, can you describe a little bit about what that role is? And why they feel like they need a more senior person? Is it like managing senior people on the client side, or what is the actual rationale from their perspective in terms of this feedback that they're giving you?
Oh, okay. I think that's related that they need to managing more large. Of course, I'm working on projects. I'm working on those company or reorganization and digital transformation projects. So when I reach to different roles, they are also looking for program or project managers, but what they are looking for is more in larger scope and also to manage the clients more big capabilities, I think. Especially when I talk to the firms, I think mostly they are very large firms, like say Google, LinkedIn, Amazon, those kind of firms. So I think that they do have a very high expectations. And also, I to be honest, I also tried McKinsey and BCG on the roles, and but I think for consulting classes, overall the problem solving and analytical skills is very strict. So that's why when I try different roles and different industry, I think it seems it's not easy to get through, and then there's a bit loss of confidence.
Yeah. Okay, so a few ideas come to mind. The first thing I would say is I would definitely keep the confidence high. I think that in general, getting rejected from something is not a bad thing. I would continue to view this as a positive thing. I mean, the first time that I applied for Morgan Stanley, I was rejected. The first time that I applied for BCG, I was rejected. So I think that I wouldn't assume you're not a good fit for something because you've been rejected. And Google in particular, I think they're pretty infamous for this. I know very few people who were at Google and got in the first time that they applied. Most people that I can think of have been rejected from Google like 5 times, and then they end up getting a job. And so I would say don't don't attribute that. Don't let your success be defined by rejections and acceptances. And actually, I am more concerned by the people who are not being rejected for things than I am by the people who are being rejected for things. Meaning, I think the people who are not being rejected for things um, are probably running a very big risk of being fairly complacent. In my mind, the world is just so dynamic and things are constantly changing so much that a linear path just if the person just means that the person's not attempting to move from opportunity A to opportunity B. So I think it's a good sign that you're like applying for stuff. That being said, I would say you do want to use every single one of these rejections as like maximizing the learning experience from that. I think there's really kind of 3 things that I think will help with that. First is really understanding what the role is looking for. Second is like getting really candid feedback in terms of why you're not a fit for a role. And then the third is getting outside experience to basically build on whatever you're being told that you need to develop. So in the first, in terms of understanding what the role is, that is actually connected a little bit to the conversation that we had earlier today with Shuying in terms of, think about talk to 5 people who are in investor relations, talk to 5 people who are on the quant side. So really talk to people and talk to people in a granular way. So with these conversations, I would say try to focus the topic on one specific aspect of the job. So rather, like, let's say you're going to talk to somebody in investor relations, rather than talk to them about, what is it that you like about investor relations, like all of that, like have a theme. So go into the conversation and be like, today, what I'm really interested in talking about is how within investor relations are you managing the relationship with the CEO of the company and other C-suite executives? And then it's like, how often are you speaking with the CEO of the organization? What type of agenda and discussion topics do you come prepared for when you're speaking with the CEO? Does he or she ever ask you questions that catch you off guard? How do you view reporting into the CEO? How is that different from the type of conversations and dynamic that you have with the CFO? Are there other C-suite executives so there's a theme to this conversation that's so targeted that you can really then walk away with a good understanding of what the role is looking for. The second, if you're applying for something and you're not getting admitted to it, I would get candid feedback as to why. It doesn't seem as though the feedback that they're sharing with you is all that candid and actionable and transparent. It seems like they're just saying, well, we're looking for somebody that's a little bit more senior in the role. Now, that's not your fault that they're not giving you candid answers. It's because sometimes, organizations, when they don't accept a candidate, they don't do a good job of actually providing that candidate with feedback. So they might just say either nothing, or they might just share feedback that's not particularly helpful or actionable. So in this case, if you're being told this thing, what I would do is I would try and find a mentor at the organization. I would literally write down, I would have the conversation with the person in terms of like, what was it about this fit that wasn't an ideal fit? Write down what they say, and then go and speak to somebody else in the organization and say, look, this is what I'm being told when I'm applying for this role. And then see that they will help you decode the feedback. or they will say, this doesn't really make any sense. Who's the recruiter that told you this? And they can follow up with the recruiter. And sometimes internally, the recruiter might be willing to give much more candid feedback to that individual. So I would say if you have a mentor at an organization, you can use that to unlock and get actual candid feedback in terms of, you know, how you stack up for these opportunities, which is invaluable. So I would make sure that you get that. And if you don't have that, then it becomes a question of developing a relationship with somebody at the company. And then the third is you can use outside experience to fill in the blank. So let's say that, you know, what they're really interested in is they want to make sure that you can have conversations with senior executives. Well, you can go and volunteer for an outside cause where the person who's leading the cause is some senior executive, and you can find yourself in a little mini chief of staff relationships. And then when you're applying for the role and when you're speaking to that team, you can reference this experience that you have speaking with the senior executive to give them confidence that you actually do have the abilities, even though it's not in your current job description, but you've filled in the blank in other things that you're doing. So I would say I would continue applying. I wouldn't let it kind of take a hit on the confidence. And as you're applying to maximize what you're learning from each of these things, I would really understand what the role is looking for, make sure that you're getting candid feedback and decoding that using mentors at the organization, and then getting outside experience to really bolster your candidacy.
That helps. Yeah, I think that's very that's a new idea about how we can get the feedback. Is indeed not many firms can provide very constructive feedback post the interview if we didn't pass through. Yeah, so I think that one I do need to working on, and also to understand well about the job description. I think another thing is I also would like to know how did you prepare for your interviews when you, let's say, looking into BCG, as in you have been rejected by them before, because I think how did you demonstrate your capabilities, and also especially to elaborate your interests and your problem solving skills.
Yeah. So when I went through the BCG interview process the first time, I probably had done 10 to 15 interviews, and, you know, was scrambling to do like case interviews right before the actual interview. The second time around, I knew that I wanted to do BCG. Like I knew that I wanted to work at BCG. I did over 80 mock interviews. The first time around, after each of these interviews, I just kind of like, okay, cool. I did an interview. Now I'm going to go and do another interview. The second time around, I had an actual detailed case log where after every single one of these interviews, I would type up, you know, exactly, I would type up what I learned from that particular case, what my feedback was, and then I would look back on that thing before I did the next interview. So I made sure that every single one of these cases, I was not just doing a case, but I was learning as much as possible from it. So I took an entirely different approach between the first time and the second time. And I think that's what led to the different result.
Yeah. That's good to know. Thanks. Listen, yeah.
Hi, Tristan. May I jump in here?
Yeah.
I'm really enjoying the conversation, and I think we all asked some really great questions. I actually have a question about mentorship in the professional space, and I'm asking more from a I guess early in our career. So, for instance, I'm a master's student right now, so I'm like really junior, not having much experience, but I think where I am right now already have some, knowledge and experience to provide back to maybe some people in their undergrad. So do you think, just because we are early in our career, do you think we still have something like to become a mentor for someone? And if so, like how do you, I guess, suggest that we start doing that?
Yeah. So I definitely think, and I think it's a great question because I think that being a mentor for somebody else, obviously you're having an impact, you're paying it forward, but I also think it will help you crystallize what you are interested in. And so I think that part of the reason that I have as much clarity on what it is that I want to do with my life is because I've done a lot of mentorship. And when you're asked this question, like if you can imagine the questions that you all are asking me today, they really force me to think about this stuff. And I do this very often, which means I'm very regularly thinking about what it is that I want to do with my life. And when you're communicating something and you're teaching something, there's research that shows that that's really what gives somebody clarity, right? Einstein was the one who said, like, if you can't explain something in simple terms, you don't really understand it. And so I think that for me, your desire to mentorship will help give you clarity in your own professional career. And there's absolutely things that you can do to basically set yourself up. So, right, there's tons of people that are interested in going to college at Boston University. If you're finding high school students that are interested or going to be applying there, and you're able to basically just share what your experience is like. Talk to them about the courses that you took. Talk to them about the extracurriculars that you were in. Talk to them about the experience living on campus. So find high schools. You can reach out. I'm sure you can reach out to whoever works in the BU admissions officer and basically ask them, are there high schools in the area that tend to send a lot of students to BU every year? They're used for a lot of schools, there usually are. And then you can now get in touch with, say, hey, I would love to, help just by answering questions for people on the BU experience. The admissions officer will love that. It's marketing that they probably don't have the time to be able to do, answering questions that they probably don't have the time to be able to do. See if there's a way that they can then connect you to whoever the guidance counselor is at the high school. Now touch base with the guidance counselor at the high school and say, hey, I would love to, host these events and conversations for people that are going to be applying to BU, where I just explain to them what my application was like, what my experience has been, and so forth. And now that guidance counselor can probably help carve out a group of 5 to 10 students that you'll have a conversation with. And now you're supporting BU, you're supporting this high school, you're supporting the 10 people that are going to be applying and trying to navigate their way to college, and you're gaining clarity in the process. So I do think that there's a tremendous amount of mentorship opportunities that you have available to you. It's just a matter of kind of taking a step back and thinking about where you want to make an impact and who you can touch base with.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, that definitely provides some guide directions. And I noticed that you also have your own website and you set up these amazing calls to provide extra mentoring for people that needed it. I guess how did you come up with that idea, and how did you, I guess, kind of market to at least give these opportunities to the people that needed
Yeah.
them?
So I came up with the idea because I graduated from college in 2012, and then I went and I was working for Morgan Stanley, and then Wharton has these things that they call the Wharton Alumni Colloquia, where they bring speakers back to campus. And these are usually speakers that are like 15, 20 years into their career, highly successful and decorated in the business world. My academic advisor when I was in college he's the director of student life for Wharton, and he's the person that organizes these events. He just on a hunch was like, Tristan, we usually bring more senior people to this, but I wonder if people would be more interested in hearing from a recent alum. Would you be open to speaking? Right. So I was the only, this was like my first year out of college, and I was the only person who didn't have many years of experience under my belt. And I went and, I had the luxury of, because I had just graduated, I still knew a lot of the students who were on campus. And so before actually showing up, I just pinged a few people who I knew were leaders of student groups. And I was like, hey, if you could spread the word, like that would be awesome. So anyway, I show up at this event. It's like a classroom of 90, but it's like standing room only. So it's like completely packed relative to
Wow.
the other sessions with the more seasoned alumni, which had maybe, 30, 40, 50 in some cases, but nobody that was pushing 100. And so I had the highest attendance, and then also they have all of the students fill out feedback at the end of the session, and the feedback that I got for my session was higher than the feedback for any of the other sessions. And then there were like maybe 7 or so sessions that were done. And so in my mind, I was like, oh, this is interesting. I enjoyed this experience, and clearly there's a demand for this. And so I continued to do a handful of events with Wharton. And then after a while, I realized, wait, rather than me having to go from New York to Philadelphia every time I want to do one of these things, if there's a demand for this at Wharton, I bet there might be interest in it at Columbia. I bet there might be interest in it at NYU, at Baruch College, at Queens, all of these schools in New York. And I was like, okay, let me just reach out to the people who are presidents of different business organizations on these campuses and see if there's an interest. And sure enough, I would go to these schools and, eventually get to the point where um, there was a big demand for it, and I was getting really good feedback on the events. And then I thought to myself, okay, rather than organize these events where I have to go to Columbia's campus, I have to go to NYU's campus, I have to go to, Queens College, I had to go to Brooklyn, I have to go to the Bronx, like rather than me traveling all throughout New York City, what if I just open these events up and people come to Morgan Stanley, and I'll book a space and everything like that. And sure enough, like people would come in, and in many ways, I actually thought it was even more impactful and interesting for the students, because people could meet their peers from other schools, and that was always a unique experience for them. And so then I just continued doing this, and over time, it started to grow at Morgan Stanley to the point where, some of these events would pass 100 people, and I was like, okay, this is a little bit too large of a size. And so I was like, okay, well, um, how can I decrease the attendance without, I didn't want to say no to somebody. So just to decrease the attendance, I just increased the frequency of the event, right? Because if you know that if this event is quarterly, you're going to get a much higher attendance, versus if people know that every couple of weeks, they can tune in for one of these conversations, you're going to get a much more targeted conversation from that perspective. So I just increased the volume of the events until we got down to basically every other week, 30 or 40 people tuning in for these conversations. So that's really how I kind of went about doing it and building it. And then every time I moved to a new place, right? So I was doing this in New York, then I moved to Boston, and I was like, okay, I want to do these in the Boston area. And I did some of them in the Boston area. Then I moved to Singapore. It's like, okay, I want to do these in a Singapore context. And I started doing them in Singapore. And it wasn't until COVID that I realized, oh, I can actually just do all of these things virtually. And it's a lot easier to do it virtually because I don't need to deal with the logistics of like finding a space, getting, approval from an organization, anything like that. I can just pick a day, pick a time, have a conversation. People who are interested in that conversation will tune in. People who are interested, who aren't, won't, and that's fine. And so that's how it has evolved over time. And so it's changed a little bit, but the underlying ethos and objective in my mind is, I want to create basically this platform. So the website is intended to say, look, if there's something that you want to have a conversation with, you can tune in for one of these you can tune in for one of these sessions, and I'm happy to answer the questions, almost like the equivalent of office hours, right? Like, yes, there will be a theme, there will be a topic, but then I always try and leave time on the back end to be able to answer any questions like we're doing now. And it's actually, I think it is more impactful for the people that tune in for it, because, if we think about this conversations, you have asked questions that are also relevant for Carla, TY, and so forth. They have asked questions that are relevant for you. So I think that the people end up getting more from these open discussions because they not only can have their questions answered, but they can also hear the questions that are on other people's minds, and that stirs their own thoughts. And then it's also logistically, there's no way. I remember at one point when I was in banking, I actually tried to calculate how long would it take me to set up, 30-minute conversations with everybody that was reaching out to me on LinkedIn, asking for time to connect. And at one point I was like, okay, it takes more than 24 hours per day to be able to kind of keep up with the volume of it. And it's like, okay, that's not feasible. So now rather than doing that, I'm able to, I don't have to say no to anybody that's reaching out for guidance. I can just say, join this next call and I'm happy to answer questions in that forum. And it's a way for me to be able to really give back in a way that isn't going to leave me exhausting or depleted, because it's a predictable amount of time that I can carve out. And especially with the time difference, I mean, it's this call started at 7 a.m. Singapore time. So I'm able to have the conversation before business hours even begin. And it's just an easier way of being able to manage it than trying to schedule a whole bunch of one-on-one conversations. I wouldn't be able to keep up with the volume of messages. So that's how this has evolved.
Yeah, that's definitely a very interesting and amazing journey that you had, and we cannot say, more about how much we appreciate this. And
Yeah,
thank
no,
you
I'm
so
happy
much.
to.
Well,
Thank you. Yeah. Awesome.
I don't have any more questions, so I just want to say thank you.
Oh, okay, my pleasure. Thank you everybody for dialing in. And if you do have any follow-up questions, feel free to shoot me a message on LinkedIn, or feel free to, if there's a topic that you're interested in covering that's not in any of the upcoming lineup of events, feel free to propose the topic. I'm always welcoming new ideas and new suggestions. So happy to organize something around what you have in mind as well.